Cones. Their aliases include pylons, traffic barrels, and witches' hats. Meant to be a temporary safety measure but omnipresent and continuously multiplying, the cones have become an icon and a flashpoint in Montreal. Are they a symbol of crumbling infrastructure, a brutal freeze-thaw cycle, state dysfunction, or the mafia? How do these brash interlopers factor into our experience of urban life and our sense of identity as Montrealers? At great cost to my own mental health, I investigated traffic cones, their function and presence in Montreal, and what they mean to this city. Broadly, what is up with the cones? Traffic cones were invented in Los Angeles in the early 40s by Charles Scanlon, who was frustrated with technology of the time. Tall wooden posts that were constantly being knocked over and destroyed. The cones' weight, shape, and sturdy construction allowed them to generally stay upright, and they were even stackable for efficient storage. Mass production of rubber cones began in 1947. Commercial use spread through the late 50s and 60s as cones were used to designate paths for traffic flow and demarcate work zones. Traffic cones were formalized and standardized as a traffic safety instrument by the U.S. Federal Highway Administration by the early 70s. The bright fluorescent color functions as a signal of warning and danger. Today, there are an estimated 140 million cones in use globally. It's impossible to know when exactly the cones became a notable presence, but the earliest article I could find bemoaning the cones was from 2010, and it placed the cones' emergence circa 2000, with the iconic model of traffic barrel being produced regionally in Quebec and replacing metal screens and signage used previously. Anecdotally, many agree their numbers have been growing over the last 10 years. Studies undertaken downtown by the Montreal Chamber of Commerce have found that a sizable minority of cones, recently 1 in 5, serve no purpose whatsoever. On the plus side, this is lower than what the sample found in the previous year, where over 1 in 4 cones was pointless. The same study found that in 2022, 94% of downtown Montreal streets had been fully or partially blocked over the past year. There are estimated to be 100,000 cones in Quebec, with 10,000 on the streets of Montreal at any given time. As I got deeper into the project, I became hyper-aware of and obsessed with the cones. It was as if I was seeing the color orange for the first time in years. The city felt oversaturated and overstimulating. On my walks through the city, everywhere my eyes rested presented an opportunity for filming and commentary. Rather than broadcasting danger, the cones were drawing me in like a moth to the flame. What were all these cones doing to Montrealers' psyche? Local journalists have had some ideas. Research has shown that this color of orange, when used in traffic or safety applications, increases caution due to perceived danger. However, studies by Montreal's Chamber of Commerce allege that the overrepresentation of cones in our streets has desensitized road users, canceling out potential safety benefits. Some suggest that the wash of fluorescent orange over the city paints it as a place of chaos and disrepair. The business community fears that the excess of cones has damaged Montreal's reputation as a world-class city. Less psychically and more materially, the cones and the detours and road closures they're associated with pose real challenges to mobility. While some of the most vociferous complaints about road closures come from motorists, unannounced road, sidewalk, and bike path closures and sketchy detours can endanger the safety of more vulnerable road users and render paths inaccessible for those with mobility devices or strollers. In Montreal, cones have become as iconic as they are reviled, coming to form a part of Montreal's identity. News organizations frequently make cheeky references to the cones, and social media is obsessed. On the Montreal subreddit, there have been dozens of threads over the last 15 years processing, speculating, and finding humor in the cones. On Instagram, local accounts revere the cones and their aesthetic siblings, the detour sign, the traffic barrel, and generally infrastructure in crisis. Montrealers dress up as cones for Halloween, throw traffic-themed parties as undergrads, and take pictures of nonsensical detour signs. I couldn't help but wonder, are we laughing at the cones, or are we the joke? This popular phenomenon has resulted in a veritable cottage industry of cone tchotchkes for sales in tourist shops, online, even at St. Joseph's Oratory. Nodding to Japanese mascot culture, a local artist has turned the cone into a literal icon of Montreal. A local inventor even created a board game where the goal is to maximize profits by keeping construction going as long as possible. Speaking with locals and friends with a longer history in the city, we feel like the cone joke is a little played out. Even on FNO Montreal, infamous for their role in discursively creating Cone City, cone posts seem to dwindle, even as the cones themselves do not. Have we reached peak cone yet? Apparently not in the real world. As the cones continue to proliferate, so have explanations and conspiracies. Of course, when we talk about cones, we're really talking about construction, which is the basis of each theory. Undebated is the impact of Montreal's climate. The freeze-thaw cycle associated with our harrowing winter is a brutal and destructive force on roads, as water seeps into pavement, expanding when it freezes, causing pressure and cascading damage with time. This alone certainly can't explain the cones, however, because of course many other cities in Canada and the northern US have similar climates without the orange crush. Then there's the mafia. While no one suggests that the mafia controls the cone industry, cones are obviously associated with construction, which is notoriously corrupt in Quebec, and many other jurisdictions. In 2009, whistleblowers claimed that 80% of road contracts in Montreal were controlled by the Italian mafia, leading to inflated costs of about 35% to taxpayers. In 2011, an inquiry was called, and the Charbonneau Commission's 2015 findings revealed the massive scale of corruption in Quebec for the first time, as testimony revealed systems of bribes, intimidation, bid rigging, and collusion between organized crime groups, political officials, and construction companies and unions. While the rumors remain, the Charbonneau Commission is considered to have been a relative success in cleaning up the construction industry, with reforms and anti-corruption bodies bringing down contracting costs even in the short term. While it's not known how much corruption currently remains, it's unlikely that the mafia is to thank for Montreal's vision of orange, at least not by itself. To really understand why there are so many cones in Montreal, we have to understand what's going on with the infrastructure. In the 60s, Montreal's economy was flying high, and it was still considered to be the economic capital of Canada. Ahead of the Olympics and Expo 67, Montreal invested heavily in infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure. However, in the economic decline that followed, maintenance was neglected, and by the new millennium, infrastructure was notably crumbling. The collapse of the Concord Boulevard overpass over Autoroute 19 in Laval killed 5 people in 2006. Just 6 years after, a previous collapse in Laval killed 1 person. In 2013, a water main break on Pine Avenue near Peel Street led to the leakage of millions of liters of water and other iconic consequences. While the provincial and municipal governments have historically been accused of putting off repairs and maintenance for decades in order to pass balanced budgets, the past 2 mayoral governments and current provincial government have all announced major investments in infrastructure to bring it up to standard, which has meant increasing construction. So that's the dysfunction on a macro level. What happens on the micro level? The city is itself responsible for only about a quarter to a third of all projects. Generally, there is no centralized planning or management of projects between city and provincial departments, private contractors, and public utilities, meaning that it's not uncommon for the same road to be dug up multiple times for different kinds of work, or have no detour mobility planning if parallel streets all happen to be blocked simultaneously. Quebec's policy generally requiring acceptance of the lowest bid also may not ensure quality in design nor execution by the contractors doing much of the work. The general lack of coordination and oversight until now has also allowed companies to get away with not respecting rules in terms of safety standards, abandoning sites but leaving cones, inappropriate signage or insufficient detour planning, and so on. As I got deeper into the world of cones, dysfunctional governance, and crumbling infrastructure, the connection to a larger popular understanding of Montreal became more clear. In certain crowds, the youthful and the hip perhaps, there's some level of enjoyment in seeing Montreal as a city in decline. Cheap rent, rampant and exuberant underemployment, an economy that's been deflated for decades. Constant construction and crumbling infrastructure are something that can be laughed off as a minor cost or idiosyncrasy of Montreal's magic, a world outside of entrepreneurial economic competition. Could this paradise of acceptable decline really last, though? And where would we be if Montreal were actually functional? Change may be afoot. In 2018, Mayor Plante instituted the Mobility Squad, which has the mandate of inspecting construction sites for proper management and compliance, looking out for abandoned orange cones, and verifying crews have the relevant permits. In 2021, the City of Montreal announced a Charter of Work Sites, which largely comprises suggestions on how to manage sites properly and minimize disruption. Earlier this year, in March 2023, Mayor Plante hosted a summit with the construction industry focusing on proper site management and coordination and limiting negative impacts. Plante administration has proposed punitive measures to companies leaving cones after abandoning construction sites, including fines and even the suspension of construction permits, among other measures. Plante also wants to shift away from the iconic traffic barrels, which she says are not always appropriate for small city streets, and replace them with smaller plastic bollards or posts. The city has also created a new online platform that will centralize all current and future construction info in one place, but it will not be fully available until at least 2028. I may have witnessed the effects of some of these improvements in my own obsessive search for cones. One morning, I noticed a promising specimen in my neighborhood, planning to investigate properly after running an errand, only to find myself surprisingly disappointed that it had been cleared. Even in the last 2 days, the city of Montreal has been updating its website to explain its construction management plan. My all-consuming detour into the world of traffic cones had left me reeling, with more questions than answers. What if cones actually became the impermanent fixtures they're meant to be? Would we miss them? Would we feel their absence? What do these interlopers mean to us, and what do they portend for the future of Montreal? And what if they were never really ours to begin with?